Hello, everyone. It's Samantha Green from Greener Side of Sam, and today I have my friend Yemane Arieon on my podcast. Um,
Hello.
I so you all know that I really love to study philosophy, but Imani posted something the other, or it was a while ago, but it was about expansion and compression, and it made me think of the feminine and masculine. And because I study philosophy, I have a very different language, and Imani studies physics. But it's always really cool to me because even though you study different things, it, I feel like we're all basically saying the same
The
thing
same
in a
thing.
different language. I also feel like that too now that I study data analysis
Oh,
because I've been studying like SQL and I'm like, oh my gosh, this has masculine and feminine energy. I'm
you
like,
can see
all
it
the coding
everywhere.
I put in is feminine, and then you run it, and the masculine comes out.
That is awesome. That is really cool. My old roommate used to, or she's studying quantum coding, and that's how I learned a lot of my stuff too.
That's cool. I do not like GitLab though. I'm like, get away from me. I'm like, let me go back to SQL. This is too
Oh,
much.
I don't know anything about it, so
But I really wanted to talk about how um, you had talked about Roger Penrose's map
mhm.
explaining black holes and that expansion and compression. And I really wanted you to explain it a bit more to see how, like, my notes of masculine and feminine kind of compare to the structure that you had laid out.
Mhm. Well, let's see. How can I even start? So the map, it's a cosmology map. So basically about the cosmos, but about the a black hole essentially. And what I always say is a black hole, we are living in a black hole in a singularity. And don't stop. The more I talk and learn about people, I learned that everybody is their own singularity. And so Roger Penrose back in 2023 won a Nobel Prize for basically proving that black holes exist. And what's really funny is we already knew that black holes existed, but in science, you need that concrete information. And without going too much into detail, one of the main things is the cosmology map. And so it basically shows the expansion of the universe and how it actually funnels down. And the best way I can describe it by just saying words without showing it is thinking about a drain. How when you turn on water, it's starting from a source, but as it funnels and circles down, it starts to pull itself down into wherever the drain goes down into. So the cosmology map basically describes the universe as like this cyclic nature, moving in a cycle. Everything cycles, and one of the things that I realized that had me ask the question is, what if the universe itself is breathing, is pulsing, is like a cycle? And one of the things that you have to do in science is find out where in the universe it's doing the same exact thing. And what I started to think about actually was the cardiovascular system, about how the heart pulses and pumps. I forgot what it is. I think I have it in my notes, but there's an aspect of, oh, right here. There's an aspect of the heartbeat that would be the black holes, which is the contraction, the forceful blood movement pushing it, and then the white holes part of the heartbeat, which would be the relaxation and the receptive phase, meaning the blood refilling itself. And so when it comes to what I talk about Roger Penrose, I guess, without going too deep into detail, because then we're just talking about science, it really is just showing the opening and the closing of a universe in a repetitive cycle over and over again. And I had to just ask myself, that's what's happening when it comes to, or I had to ask myself, is that what is happening when it comes to what is happening in life? Is we're getting a chance to, open to live life, and then it closes, and then, we disappear. Who knows, what they say, it all just turns into dust, and then it restarts, but it's restarting with the information that it's gained from that first original
Mhm.
expansion, because it's always falling back down on itself. Essentially, what that cosmology map is showing what gravity is doing to us, how it creates matter, how it creates a timeline, which would be linear time. So that's basically what it is. It's just a graph of how our universe is operating, or what it would look like.
I love that. And I I saw your notes on the white holes too and being the
Mhm.
feminine. And you were talking about how, like, with breathing and the heartbeat and the relaxation, because the way after I saw your Roger Penrose's map
Mhm.
and the infinity symbol, I had like a spark in my mind thinking about the feminine and masculine.
Mhm.
And over the last couple months, I've kind of tried to study and figure out what they actually are, kind
Mhm.
of above the cultural definitions, to find really a universal definition. And I think it has a lot to do with the black holes and the expansion and compression. And you were talking about like that original like black
Mhm.
hole at the top. And the way I look at like the feminine is kind of like cumulative Y's
Mhm.
that just kind of collect, and it's just like this giant pool of data that it's almost like a sponge that it just kind of collects data until it's almost like it collapses on itself
Right.
and
Right.
then
Right.
becomes like a
Exactly.
like a masculine what.
Yes.
And I even look at the feminine as being like a verb or an
Hmm.
adverb or a preposition, and then like a noun being or yeah, a noun
Yeah.
being in the masculine. And the because a noun is very like it's stagnant. It doesn't really look like it moves. And I would say that is a very like masculine is more of like a structure. And when
Matter. Mhm.
yes, yes. And then the feminine I would say has a structure, but it
Mhm.
continuously moves. And I was going to say something else. Oh, so I think of like an infinity symbol. And you know how in the middle it looks like the points are touching
Yeah.
because it's almost like that compression. And so it looks like it has a sort of structure to it, but it's not. I'm not sure if this is completely correct, but I don't think it's actually touching, kind of like DNA. Like if you look at it at a certain angle, it looks like it's touching, but it's not actually
Mhm.
touching. It's just like that perception. So our perception, like in that masculine mindset, is very much like this is a structure, it's immovable. But like going into the feminine, it's like all these whys. I kind of like I my philosophy friends, I don't know how they put up with me because I'm very much like they'll say all these like big terms and go
Mhm.
into like Heideggerian theory. And I'm just kind of like along for the ride and I'm just listening. And then all of a sudden, an idea like pops up like, oh, that made me think of that. And I think that's a very like feminine way of
Yeah.
thinking.
It is. It's also a very easy way to talk to people. I feel when
Mhm.
we're describing such complex things, because there's also nothing really concrete just as of yet. You always need someone that is, I don't want to say like in touch with people, because I sometimes will feel this lack of self-confidence when it comes to speaking, especially when it comes to science communication,
Me
because I
too.
don't have all of the big words. But then I had to learn the reason why I might be likable to other people or more digestible to others is because I don't have the big words. So I have to,
Mhm.
find different ways. And one of the things that I learned, actually, a friend of mine, I did a session for her, and then she was like, "Do you want to see these cards?" And she pulled out these cards, and the cards came out, and one of the cards was basically metaphor. And I was like, "Oh my God." And she was like, "It just sounds like, you struggle with describing something." And it's because sometimes I think that I have to ask myself, who am I talking to? I was like, okay, I want to describe this on a grand scale, but the people that I'm talking to are the people who understand things like metaphor. So I always started
Mhm.
to be like, how can I describe this in a metaphor, which got me to the heartbeats. So if that helps you at all, I'm not one to say all of the big words. If I know it, I'll do my best to still break it down. And I dock that down to my education and early childhood education. If you want to
Mm.
describe something to a child that's complex, you're not going to give them big words. You're going to break it down for them. And if you're able to do that, then that itself is one of the most important things in life, and that's how we're going to grow and expand, which is what the feminine energy does. Is we're
Mm.
creating new ways to, I don't know, create matter, because what comes from being able to properly understand something is then creation, is projects, is experiments that get people going. But if they don't understand, if someone can't communicate that, yeah, so don't, I don't know, I guess don't knock yourself, because I'm the same way.
And that's kind of what I've been trying to do with philosophy is
Right.
sort of make it more accessible to
Mhm.
people, because like like I said, I don't have all those big words either, and that's because I just now started getting into
Mhm.
philosophy in the last 3 years, and much of that stuff takes like 20, 30, 40
Right.
years, to really, really get all of that terminology down and have it be like organic and like freely flows through you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but what I started doing is to explain what I'm trying to explain philosophically is I write stories.
Right.
And I think that's a very feminine way of going about it because it's roundabout. And I feel like a lot of philosophy will be like, they will try to have the terminology down and all of that. Uh, and almost try to hit it head on in a very
Mhm.
masculine way. But I'm trying to like kind of bring it out to where it can be universally experienced.
Mhm.
Um,
Which you
because
just described the cosmic egg. You just described literally the model of the universe.
wait,
I'm
what
so
is the
serious.
cosmic egg?
So the cosmic it's back in a book, but it just describes the shape of our universe again. But basically, it starts at a point. So you're at a point, and then there's a force that so the Big Bang. Okay, so example, the Big Bang. Boom, Big Bang happens. It's pushing itself all the way out, but eventually the Big Bang has so much energy that it's creating a gravitational field that's going to obviously pull whatever it just pushed out back. And
Oh.
so the idea is, which is what then creates the white hole. So boom, Big Bang, the energy moves forward, but what it does is it creates this sort of umbrella shape and it falls back on itself. So like how you said you do this roundabout kind of thing to basically get back to the point. It's because you have to. You literally have to. Because if you think about it, the idea, it's an explosion. It explodes. But where does that idea go? Like there's so many pieces that need to be collected, and I like to think of that through life. Like you said, it's going to take 20 years. Not when you're really in it and you start to then see it in your life and it starts to make sense, and that's where those metaphors come from, is your own life, is
Mhm.
the stories that you write. But what are those stories based off of? Probably your life. You probably, especially as a mother, probably see so much that you could connect the dots, especially when it comes to philosophy or even psychology. Just the human mind is such a big library of things. You can just watch one person and be like, can connect the dots and be like, wow. So yeah,
Mhm. Mhm.
you're
I
doing
would
it
also
exactly right.
I would also say that, like, in the feminine, there's almost like a forgetting of yourself too,
Hmm.
and it's more less about catching something
Hmm.
and more about the experience. So
Mm-hmm.
I always use this example of like how men and women communicate. And I hate to make generalizations, but like just as like a symbol, men will like if there's a very complex problem, it's more internalized.
Hmm.
And then they'll just like be like, oh, I have the answer to the problem. But like, I feel like women, we will kind of lay it all out on the
Yeah.
table, all aspects of it. And we're like, we're just going to talk about every single thing
Mm-hmm.
in detail. And then all of a sudden, like an answer will pop up. I was actually explaining this to a friend of mine because they were like, I don't understand why women feel they need to talk about the problem when the problem is right there and it's not going to get done. This we already know what we need to do about the problem, and it explains um, that women are still looking for a solution, but the solution is more metaphysical
Mm-hmm.
to that problem. And it's almost like another metaphor coming in that just popped
Mm-hmm.
up. It's almost like when you come across like a door that's locked and you're like, okay, this is a problem. And so the person next to the door is like, well, you can look for a needle in this haystack over here. So what you do is you like lay out the entire haystack and you look through every single thing. But instead of finding a needle, you actually find the key to the door, but you didn't even realize that the key was there.
Mm-hmm.
So I also see it as very unconscious, like almost like the unconscious announcing itself in some
Mm-hmm.
way.
Yeah, it is very true. Like that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes that I don't know off the top of my head. I do, but I don't. But it's about chaos. And I loved it so much I basically tattooed it on myself. Like literally tattooed it on myself.
Love
Um,
that.
but what I think about what because chaos is basically the multiplicity of possibilities, so everything all at once.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually it does funnel down into order. And I believe it does have to get chaotic before, you get to that point. And I think sometimes, like when I think about masculine energy or men, and sometimes we do have to just talk about, men, the just
Mm-hmm.
symbol. But sometimes I think because there's this, this sigma around them being strong and put together, to be chaotic, to be all over the place is literally against their
Mm-hmm.
energy. And so I think about like when I'm cleaning sometimes, I'll literally take everything out and it'll look like a mess. And it's like, no, there's a process, I promise you.
Yep.
And it's like, just give me time. And eventually it does get down, but sometimes it's like it's so funny when you said it like that, thinking about it right now, that really is a feminine trait, is to just put it all out onto the table, let it be chaotic a little bit, but then it does funnel down in together. It's constantly like this releasing. That's hilarious. I'm gonna have to really think about this all.
Wow. Um, um, there was something I was gonna say too. Oh, um, white holes.
Mm-hmm.
You also explain a little bit more about that? Because I saw your notes on
Yeah.
that, but I really wanted to go more into depth with that.
Yes. So going back to the nature of the universe, I'll just read off is through expansion and compression. So expansion being feminine energy, compression being masculine. This then ties it into basically the cosmic yin and yang, the black holes and white holes. And just from learning, I don't think at first I knew white holes really existed. I did, but I didn't.
Mhm.
Because always is the focus of black holes. But to explain white holes, first I'm going to explain black holes. Black holes being the masculine energy, which is the compression, and absorption, which is the singularity itself, the thing that creates the matter, like we
Okay.
talked about. So black holes pull in matter and light, or I would say pulls in the light to create matter, creating a focused force. So a focused force, meaning that, like, that one point, seeing the one solution. So this represents structure, containment, and destruction for rebirth. not necessarily the rebirth itself, but it's laying down the foundation and the containment um, for it. And then we have white holes. So white holes are created, or white holes is the space in which essentially there's the Big Bang would have spewed out of to then explode. So white holes is that, oh, white holes would be like the white light. Look into the white light. Like you're going into it. That's
Oh.
essentially what it would be. I just thought about it because I know they won't see this, but I want to show you. I can show you this on my phone, I think. But a white hole, and this is from the
Oh,
book
yes.
Stalking the Wild Pendulum. So for people, if you see the book Stalking the Wild Pendulum on the mechanics of consciousness, the imagery in there, the little diagrams in there are so great for explaining consciousness and everything that I'm speaking about. If you ever want to look, or maybe I can send you these and you can put them up. I don't know. Um, but white holes would then be feminine energy. So it's always said that with black holes, there's no escape from light. Once you're entering into a black hole, you literally cannot escape. However, I believe because science doesn't know this yet that we're in a singularity, when we come out of it, there is a white hole within a black hole, which would be the exit of it. And I believe the only way to get back to the white hole is to compress back down. So, what am I thinking of? There's something called entropy, which talks about, basically everything funneling down into an order, but like a rubber band. That's a good
Oh, yes.
explanation. So yes, when you stretch out a rubber band, it stretches out, but eventually it does go back, and it might look a little wobbly. I mean, the more you stretch it, the more it's gonna, not go back to its original state. But eventually, that black hole does come back to its source, which would be the white hole, but it's another exit. And basically, when you exit, the white hole is release and creation. So matter basically ejected outward, forming new universes. So eventually, matter is going to get so dense, so compacted that it then needs to just be pushed out of a hole, which would be the white hole. I don't know how this is gonna,
Mhm.
I don't have the words for it. I don't even know. I can't even like think about it right now. Um, but eventually we're going to get back to this white hole where all that matter that was created in a black hole gets ejected. And this is an actual thing. This is how black holes are created. And yeah, and created. Anyway, but basically this represents flow, openness, and the birth of new beginnings. So the entire point of life, going back to that cosmology map, the expansion and compression, that compression is always going to open again because the whole point of life is evolution, is we're evolving. But within one black hole, you can only evolve so much. When I say that a black hole is containment, it's creating that structure. Eventually that structure becomes finite, or that structure is finite.
Mhm.
And you talked about it a little bit. You said it's not really touching, and that's true because science proved that nothing is truly tangible. you know the quantum particles are actually just vibrating really really close together, that they look like they're touching. So there's always this possibility of a force being large enough to break all of that apart. So there goes the energy. So when I say I don't know how it's going to eject itself out, well, it's not really matter in the first place. It's not solid. It's just the idea of being solid. And the energy that's coming into a black hole is simply light. One of the first couple elements, created in the world is, protons, neutrons, all of those things. So light energy coming into a black hole, living its life, creating matter, and then it's like, okay, time's up, because literally just time is up. It's finite. And then it busts. I don't know what's going to create it. I don't know what's going to cause it. I mean, we're seeing that in life right now, with us using a lot of our resources. Eventually, humans aren't going to be here. And then eventually, the earth does its thing, and maybe it does revert back, just like how an old person reverts back to a child in that way. And so that's basically what a black hole and a white hole is. Um,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. First of all, that is incredible. Because I was, thank you for explaining that because I was confused on like whether the hole was feminine or masculine and the black
Hmm.
hole was masculine or not. So, okay. So this is going to get really kooky and kind of like
You know
veer
I'm
off
kooky.
course a little bit.
Hmm.
But, uh, okay. So I saw this video
Hmm.
one time and I can't remember who it was, but it was basically somebody talking about what happens after you die. And they were like, a lot of people will see the light and they want to go into the light, but then when they go into the light, their life, or into the white light, their life
Hmm.
starts all over again.
Right.
You don't want
Right.
to do that if you want to stay in the afterlife. And I was like, so
Yeah.
when you explain that, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like physics in the spiritual
That's
realm.
exactly it. Like
Oh my
reincarnation.
gosh.
Don't go into the light. You're not doing it because you're doing it
I,
again.
my brain is like a little
Mhm.
blown right now.
Welcome to it. Welcome to it, girl.
Whew. So I thought it was really, really interesting that you brought that up. And so it makes me think because I had always wondered about like things like reincarnation or
Hmm.
like what exactly happens after we die and how people would talk about past lives and stuff like that. And it all sounds kooky, but then speaking about this
Hmm.
in like physics or philosophy, I'm like, oh, that theory is actually kind of tangible
Yeah, it
when you
is.
think about it.
And I can give you more to it a little bit. Like I'll try my best, but like you asked, you said like what
Yes, please.
happens after we die. Um, Death is probably one of my, or not death, but like, I guess regeneration is one of my favorite topics. Especially tapping into that energy. You're so open to how small we are. You start to feel like, oh my God, like, does this life even matter? It does. It really does.
Mhm.
For the simple fact that we need the information each person is collecting to then create more. Um, Sometimes it can sound a little selfish, like, what am I? I'm just here to help. Yeah, but that's you being a part of something, greater.
Mhm.
Um, and so when I talk about, the white light, let's go to the part where, go into the white light. So I'm going to get a little kooky and I'm going to try my best because as you were talking, I was like, I
Get
think I
kooky.
can use,
Get kooky.
yeah. So,
We listen and we don't judge.
yes, exactly. Um, so black holes, like I said, it is all about a gravitational collapse, meaning there's this heavier force, what I say, a focused force, so gravity compressing to an extreme density, creating a singularity, creating this world, basically a point in which space-time curves infinitely, um, or not really infinitely, but like, creating a timeline where light cannot
Mhm.
escape. And so you hear all the time we're light beings, we're light beings, higher self, like, everything is light in some type of way. um and so one of the things that I know is there's something called a rotating black hole. I believe it's called Keer, Keer black holes, but they're rotating black holes. And I like to, let's see, the when I was reading the book, it says that it would act as a cosmic gateway, so into other,
Mhm.
cosmic galaxies because it's moving around. So, let's say it's rotating and moving around and you hit a white hole, but it's still rotating, you'd be pushing yourself out into a different aspect. So we die, and let's say that the only way to not go back into the white hole would essentially be to raise your frequency. The more you raise your frequency, you're essentially moving faster than the speed of light. When something is moving faster than the speed of light, it disappears from our visual, it would disappear from our visual spectrum. An easy way to think about this is thinking about the light spectrum itself. When you think of visible light, it's a very, very small section on that spectrum. The next thing would be, UV light, gamma rays, X rays. We cannot physically see that in the eye, but it's something we know because of tools here. So thinking about something greater than us that is also light. So visible light is really small, like the rainbow, the chakras. Then there's something more outside of that, obviously. Something that I know that I learned from the books by Stuart Edward White, is that our higher self energy essentially is kind of like radiating in that purple energy, that will like show up in like
Yeah.
UV, right? So it's there. So like our physical body and then our intangible body, and there's I can go on about that, but I'm not. Um, it is a lot larger than we think. Like, yes, we're human, but like our true self is a lot larger, like on the scale. Anyway, and so because everybody says, Earth is a school, we're here to learn a lesson. If you're not constantly raising your frequencies and take your time, we're probably going to be here for a minute, but like the whole
Mhm.
point of it is that, if you don't want to go back into that white light, if you're not operating on a certain frequency where you're picking up on something on a frequency that would be outside of faster than the speed of light, basically, there's no way that you would be able to even get out of that black hole. Does that make a little sense?
Yes.
Especially the white hole
Yes.
expanding and going out.
So
That's
it would
just
kind of
what
like,
popped up in my head. Yeah.
sorry, so it would kind of like suck you back into the white
Yeah. Yeah.
light because your frequency isn't high enough
Yeah.
to like outrace it.
As a, exactly as a being, because essentially you're leaving this fleshly body, and you do have this spiritual body, this spiritual entity aspect that essentially is collecting like not like brownie points, but like when we do things, we are raising that frequency. We're raising, yes, our physical frequency, but there's only so much we can move and shift. But
Mhm.
our higher self is constantly collecting information. That's the whole point we're here for. And so I kind of like to think of it as like, if you're not, real quick, rewind. I remember my ex's grandma. I like to give credit where credit is due. She told us one time, she said, the gifts or the things that you learn on earth become gifts in heaven. She was Christian. But I took that and I ran with it by saying, like, the things that I learn here and I truly integrate and turn into wisdom becomes
Mhm.
truly a part of my frequency. That's why I believe people reincarnate. And there's actually, the last thing I'll say before, opening it back up is, Kendrick Lamar just put out an album. I've been listening to it because it's very interesting, but he has this one song that I just can't stop listening to, but it's called Reincarnated. And in that song, he basically says, last year I did a past life regression and it really messed me up. And the whole song is about, he basically says, I've been given reincarnation for 100 plus years, which actually isn't a long time if you really think about it, because let's say we live 80 years, 60 years, whatever. But the first part of the song, he goes on to talk about his life in Michigan as a musician. And he talks about that. And he talks about how he had greed and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going into the details, but he basically says, I died. I was greedy. I didn't do anything with it. He was like, then my next life, it's 3 lives. He was like, then my next life, I'm a seductive vocalist. And he was like, and basically uh, I lost my life to drugs, to sedative sleeping pills, whatever. And he basically didn't learn his lesson. And then he literally says, "My present life is Kendrick Lamar using the lyrics to put them in awe." And he talks about him as Kendrick Lamar as his present life, and it's really cool because I'm like, this is what I mean when are you learning the lesson? Even though he wasn't the same person, he was on that same frequency of a musician, of learning something. And now he's gotten this past life regression. He's gone back and been like, oh, I got it. I see why I'm here. And now he can progress forward. And he goes on in the rest of the song to basically be like, now I see why I'm here. Now I'm no longer putting people in fear, because the more that word is diminished, the more it's not real. And I was like, oh my God. And he speaks and he uses this other voice, kind of like how my reference is the Bible, but in the Bible, when God speaks, it's in red. And God can be
Mhm.
anything that you believe, but when God speaks, it's a different energy. And so he has this
Yeah.
energy of someone speaking to him, of saying, like, what are you doing to grow, to change, to do for life and help it expand? And I just found that to be really interesting because I was like, that's what life should be about. And it's interesting because Kendrick Lamar has always been, they rap, and I used to not be a big person that listened to rap until I started listening. And so it's just been interesting to see how he's taken his experience and he's grown. And hopefully he's served that 100 times or that 100 years and can get out of the life. But that's what I mean when I say,
Yeah.
like, new frequency.
Oh gosh, that's so incredible. And um it also makes me think of like that going into the light, that idea of reincarnation
Mhm.
is like there is some forgetting, but there's
Mhm. Right.
something that stays with us. And it's those, like you were talking about being a musician, those natural talents.
Mhm.
There's nothing that can explain like why we have natural talents for
Right.
some reason. Like why one person can sing and then one person can just dance really well.
Mhm.
And the only thing I can think of is kind of like that cumulative why
Right.
and that data coming in from like different past lives or like the possibility of that.
Mhm.
Um, it also when you were talking about higher higher selves, I
Mhm.
think of one word that popped in my mind was intuition.
Yeah.
And I almost because I've always wondered what
Mhm.
intuition was exactly. And I almost now think, after talking about this, I almost now think it's like when you see a pattern in the data.
Mhm.
Like when you come across something and then it sends a message to the data, and then like all the cumulative data of the whys, like it throws out a pattern at you, but you can't recognize the pattern. So
Mhm.
it comes more out as like a feeling rather than like just logic. And I also want to say too is so I just wrote this story and there's this line in there because it's talking about the feminine and the masculine
Mhm.
energies, and the the mermaid is like representing the feminine energy, and she basically tells the fisherman, the masculine, like your logic does not exist here. Like logic still
Mm.
exists here, but your logic does not exist here. And so I think, when we bring things like intuition and reincarnation and kind of like more woo-woo topics that are like
Mhm.
much more feminine to the table, I almost feel that like that masculine structure is a little more hesitant,
Yeah.
or I wouldn't necessarily use the word afraid, but just like kind of standoffish
Mhm.
to that type of, because I almost look at feminine energy to be like a higher energy because it's just so
Mhm.
chaotic. It's
Yeah,
just
sure.
everything everywhere all at once. And um, if you kind of like go into that feminine void, it's like that structure in the masculine is just going to be dismantled.
You're right.
And
Right.
I will say, because I talked to my friend about this the other day, I did make note that having structure in the masculine is very beneficial for society to
Mhm.
run. Like if we did not have that, everything would just be like just an
It would.
explosion all
It
over the
really
place.
would.
So it's extremely essential to have, but in order to like create or have a higher form of the structure, it's almost like one needs to go into
Mhm.
that that feeling of the feminine and feel it all.
Mhm.
And like in order to come back and birth something new in the masculine. And
It
I think
it
that's
makes
all.
sense.
But
No, yeah, no, I get it because again, like that's what you're talking about, or you're basically describing the process of it, and to even get deeper into or to truly talk about the masculine and feminine energy, I was really excited to talk about it because I had already had these ideas. So when you were like, "This is what I want to talk about," I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." I was like, I've already wanted to make this connection. I always have, but I've had to learn how to put things down. But I researched this probably 3 years ago, and I always have to put it down because I'm pulling it from God knows where. Again, feminine energy. It's coming out of nowhere. Like I don't freaking know. It's coming out, and this is what I have. And it wasn't until this is why I say now, being in a relationship now, where I was alone doing it myself. I still have my own masculine aspects, but not. I'm majority feminine. But I think when I was by myself, I was acting from a more masculine energy, but it wasn't as strong. Because it's not that wasn't where it was meant to be. It's supposed to have an even balance of it. But being now in a relationship has actually helped me a lot more to understand everything that I researched 3 years ago, simply
Mm-hmm.
because now I have a masculine energy in my life that creates that containment now. But at first, and I guess to before going deeper into it, coming in, being that feminine energy, and saying that woo woo stuff. I believe the only reason that it made sense and not make the masculine energy stand off is because with the feminine energy, at the end of the day, like you said in the beginning, you said, I feel like there's still some type of structure, a loose structure when it comes to feminine energy, but it
Mm-hmm.
does need to have a structure. Essentially, the feminine has to know how to operate in that chaos, has to have her own type of foundation, even though she's like this floating field essentially. And where her
Mm-hmm.
masculine energy comes from is that ether, that other world. And that's why, feminine energy really has to, with intuitive energy, it comes from having faith in something that it's not tangible. And so, because, especially my name, Imani, meaning faith, because I had so much faith in something outside of me that essentially was my masculine energy, not my actual masculine energy, but like, I think God, like God energy,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, angels, whatever, but something outside of myself that helped me to continue to move as a feminine energy. I then began to have physical proof of all my woo woo stuff. And so and I also had to learn discernment. And so when we talk about intuition, I didn't even know that it was, intuition, because intuition is just that higher self being able to see the timeline a lot more than we can. And so they'll
Mm-hmm.
drop little quantum bits into our life. And when you were talking, you were like, I feel like it's just data and patterns. All intuition, it's awareness. And so when
Mm-hmm.
when the feminine energy is able to become aware of those patterns. And I know this can, sound crazy to some, because I know some feminine energy, they can sound all crazy, but there's no landing in it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's just, different people, like they might just be too chaotic or might not even have, you do have to have this process of your own grounding, your own structuring yourself back in. And so when you then have a masculine energy come and do that for you, that masculine energy creates a container to where then you can just spew out and it'll start to make sense. And so I believe when the feminine energy continues to trust and build faith in herself by herself, that's what attracts that masculine energy, because the masculine has always been doing it by himself, their self.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they'll always come together. And because that's life, it's yin and yang. But and then I guess this brings me back is in the beginning they're always going to be separated. And
Mm-hmm.
this is whether it be people, whether it be literally the cosmos acting, that big bang separates them until eventually they come together. And then, like how you said, they're in the middle. They might not be touching, but they are operating together in
Mm-hmm.
tandem, creating this world around them. But the two very much need each other. And I believe it's when the feminine starts to take on the masculine energy, the masculine energy's feminine energy. so that they're not so burdened by their feminine. Oh, it's so confusing. I'm trying to like think of like my relationship with not saying without like saying like men, woman, or like,
Right,
but
it's so hard because, like,
yeah,
because then people, like, listen and then they make generalizations,
right,
and it's
right,
like, "No, that's not what I'm talking about," because,
right,
like, you yourself could have masculine and
right,
feminine energy
exactly,
within
exactly.
just you, and so
Hmm.
I think people get confused when they hear woman, feminine energy, they only think she has feminine
Hmm.
energy, or, like, a man,
Hmm.
he only has masculine energy, but
It is
really,
actually true.
like, I think to be a healthy human being, you have to have those like
Both,
balanced within yourself. Otherwise, you're
100%.
just gonna be all over the place or
Yeah,
you're not gonna get anywhere.
ex-
Like,
ex- ex- exactly right. You'll start to seem a little crazy. I believe when a feminine energy, whether, whoever they are, using they, um, when a feminine energy does not have any type of masculine energy, any type of structure, any type of foundation. And this can go, when I talk about feminine energy, you can be born male, you can be born female, you can be born whatever. When you have an influx of feminine energy and you grow up, let's say, without that masculine energy, or let's say you're born with an influx of feminine energy and you grow up without that masculine energy to root you, that's where that chaos spews, to where
mhm,
then the feminine has to literally create her own bubble, her own containment. Again, you are your own singularity, you have to create your own containment. But if it's not strong enough, and this is through our own lives that we're growing. And so the same thing, if you're masculine, feminine energy, I like to think of, instead of saying feminine energy, when it comes to masculine energy, I like to think of emotional energy. Our
mhm,
emotional state is more of a feminine energy because it's internal, simply because it's internal, not
mhm,
because some feminine is more emotional. But that's why I'm using emotions is energy, emotions that are internal. Usually, when a masculine energy, because of the stigma, is an emotion or whatever, that emotion then starts to be chaotic outside of them. And they can feel that then creates pressure, depressed. And so that's why I say, the masculine then needs the feminine to release, to be able to push and focus the force of their emotions into something else, into something that can then take it and create something else within. And
mhm.
sometimes that creation is just an analysis or a woman's intuition and being like, well, this is what I feel. And being able to juggle both of those, you really need you need both of them because you need to be able to operate on one, but you also need to be able to become aware of one of the other state so that you know when you're switching. Because I always say that, you're God, I'm getting so lost right now, so might just not
No,
be the
you're
most.
good. You're good. You're good. No, something else that popped up for me was,
Mm,
like you talked about growing up with a certain type of energy. I would
mm.
say the way I grew up, because you always hear the joke of the firstborn daughter.
Yeah, me.
Like, when she grows up, she, like, is basically raised like a
Mm,
man, essentially.
mhm,
So I had a lot more masculine energy in me, and
me
I
too.
think over the past few years, I've really kind of focused on, um, having that, or gaining that feminine energy,
Mhm,
and, um, and it's shown up in different aspects of my life, like my writing. My writing
mhm,
was very stagnant for a long, long time, and I couldn't really expand it in any sort of way or get better in it. I mean,
mhm,
better is figurative, but, um, or subjective, I should say.
mhm.
But, it wasn't until I kind of, like, threw myself into the void and swam with the fishes in the depths of the sea.
Hilarious.
I know that makes no sense, but
It does
it
though.
wasn't until then that I could actually find, um, different emotions
Mm,
that I could now describe, and it was learning, and I think because I had, so much structure in the masculine energy, I could actually contain it. So it was like, I
yeah,
would be, like, swimming, 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 and then I'd catch something, and then, like, bring it back with me, and I always
mhm,
call it, like, this theory I'm working on how we retrieve art. Which is basically like forgetting oneself and going into the void, and then once you catch a glimpse, then you go
Hmm.
back out. And that's what I do with a lot of my conversations too, my philosophical conversations, because they'll be like
Amazing.
talking, and I'm like, oh, that makes me think of this.
Right.
And also, how else did it show up in my life? There was one other thing, and I lost it. I lost it. I'll find it
That's hilarious. That's
somewhere in
funny.
the void again.
That no, for real. That because I'm also a firstborn daughter, and
Nice.
in my family we have a lot of women, or my mom's side of my family.
Mhm.
Um, I think my dad's side too, but the way I think about it is, always having to be strong. I've never felt this like, or I have always felt, protected obviously with my family, but I've always had to be on alert. And like how you said, you've built your own containment that you could go deep enough to where
Mhm.
that containment then for me started to be such very thick walls that I didn't realize that I even had up. Um, and the more I went in depth with myself, and I think the walls were mainly just, protecting because it was like, I've done this myself. You get that
Mhm.
very much independent nature. And so, as a firstborn daughter, then now being in a relationship where someone else got that containment for you, and it's like, hey, like, come over here, it's safe. You're like, but I felt like I was like, oh my God, but I almost didn't want to wait. I didn't want to lose my masculinity. I was like, but I've worked so
Mhm.
hard for this, you know. I
Yeah.
This has gotten me to where I am, and it then began. It helped me to realize because I can go deep too, just like you said, going deep swimming with the fishes. Like when I was a child, I always wanted to be a marine biologist, specifically to study the bioluminescent animals. And the bioluminescent animals, because I'm thinking about it now, obsessed with light even as a child. But like the bioluminescent animals are only shown up in the deep, deep, deep sea. And so now it's like I'm in a relationship with a man who quite literally is a swimmer in deep end waters. And I find that always so nice because it's like I've gotten someone that's, he thrives in the deep end, quite
Mhm.
literally thrives in the deep end. And so in realizing that, I was like, oh, I was safe enough to then be like, well, now I don't have to utilize so much energy to dive
Mhm.
deep, but also hold the wall too, or
Right.
have the wall. And so it just brings me back to like the white hole is I'm able to expand freely now, because I now have this black hole to contain and build structure. And it's just been really interesting to see that in a relationship. You wanted to talk about, the feminine and masculine energy. I always say that when it comes to a relationship and what I've seen from my relationship, I remember when we first started dating, we talked about ourselves being two galaxies at first that would like just bounce off of each other. And now
Mm.
it like, the galaxies started to slow down and then they started to merge into each other where now we're one. Literally describe actually, I described it a little bit and then he gave me like the visualization of like two galaxies bouncing. He was like, I think that we're just, colliding just a little bit, but not all the way. And the more deep we get into the relationship, the more I see physically, like in my world, where, sometimes I'm the focus where I'm, or sometimes he's the focus where I am teaching him the things that I've learned from my time in the past. And so when you say, they're not open to it, I believe you have to have someone that is open to receive and someone that is open to, give. And so when he's the focus, it's like, or the focus on growing him and his singularity, that's when I'm sharing my information, all of my knowledge to create
Mhm.
wisdom. And then when I'm the focus and I need to learn, like for example, my fiance is a nutritionist and knows a lot about, diet, food, and everything. And that was something that I needed to learn. I love food, but
Mhm.
I was very inconsistent in it. Like I love food down bad. But again, especially my work schedule being inconsistent. So now seeing the importance of it it's like now I'm just stronger. I feel stronger and more strength to be able to then, okay, next. And it's just been this, this back and forth, this like ping pong game of using each other's singularities to then grow our singularity together. And I feel like people do that. You have children, you've seen the same thing, I'm sure. Like people do that when you have kids, is now, okay, now here's quite literally a physical representation of both of our singularities. Now they've got, and
Mm-hmm.
that's going back to our beginning, what we said in the beginning. What's the cosmology, Matt? What was Roger Penrose talking about? That, exactly that is, we start off this one thing, but then we break apart and we're this new thing that has this energy of the old thing. Kids, the easiest way to
Mm-hmm.
explain it. And then they go
Yes.
live their life, and you're like, whoa, where did you get that from? Oh,
Right. And when you were talking about like the masculine energy coming in so that you can like kind of relax and receive, I think of it like almost like say we're like a house that's made out of wood. Like there's still a
mhm.
structure there. It's still sturdy, but that like masculine energy instead like that comes in almost needs to be like a brick house
Yeah,
so that like we can kind of like move in
for
our
real.
house like within that brick house.
Mhm.
um so it's almost like the masculine energy like that comes in has to like push or like not compress but like break down
Yeah, you're right.
the
Focused
masculine
force.
energy that you have so that you can be like
Yeah,
woo
yeah.
chaos
Which is
within the
true
brick
because
house.
exactly, chaos. And boy, am I chaotic. But no, you are right. Is the masculine energy, and I believe when we talk about people holding masculine energy, again, if you're man or woman, you, in order to cultivate that, you have to trust in your other side. Just like
Mm-hmm.
feminine energy, I have to trust, like, okay, you're coming in with this, again, black holes is a focused force. If you're coming in with a focused force, I have to trust that you have a focused force. I have to trust where you've been just as much as you're trusting that once you built this force, that the chaos that is going to exude, then turning into order, is going to
Mm-hmm.
strengthen, that brick house, or, start growing out and building a garden and everything. And so when we talk about, I feel like the fishermen, but that's not logic. You have to trust both of them because,
Mm-hmm.
the mermaid could help the fish. I don't know if the mermaid's gonna help the fisherman give her fish friends or whatever, but like, it can be this play, but it does come down to trust, and it does come down to understanding that there's always multiple forces at play, and three forces technically, but when it comes to whoever, whether you're masculine or feminine, I think the first step in understanding the interplay of either of them is that there is another force. And once you can figure that out, it is maybe a little easier and you'll be a little more open to it. Um, because regardless, you have to be open. Like, how do you think that you got here? How did you think that expansion happened? And how do you think that you're going to get out? Is something has to open, a door has to open. I think that's really cool.
Yes. And I think that's a really good place to stop because if we keep
Mhm.
going, it's just going to keep going and going.
Very much so, because it's like Pandora's box.
Oh gosh, yes.
We didn't opened it, and now just from the beginning, I'm like, I need to speak more. You just make so many connections, but that's what's so important about people opening the conversation.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know, it's cool.
Yes, definitely. And thank you so much for talking with me. I know, like, our schedules just like kind of like don't
We
match
didn't.
up, and being a mom and you with your schedule, I'm really thankful that we were finally able to talk and make
Happy
all
to be
these
here.
connections. I think about the reincarnation thing too, and I'm like, oh my gosh, now I can't unsee it. The white the white
Yeah,
hole.
I'm telling you, I think I even saw that video and I was like, wow, like that does make a lot of sense. Don't go into the light. Um, I don't know. It's cool. I hope
Or
that's what it
do
is.
go into
Or
the
do.
light and keep learning the lesson. One more thing, and I'll end this. Um, but I was talking to a friend one day, and I just said something kind of off a whim, and I think it relates to this because I said, I wonder if, the lesson or why we go through life is to go through it, go through all that suffering and learning and understanding, and just to turn back around and be like, well, I could do that again. I could do it
I
again.
don't know. I don't know. It must not be that bad. Which, and I think it really must not be when we're all in our heads. It really must not be because there's a reason. This is why, like, sometimes when everybody's going through stuff, I'm like, you asked for it. Like, I
Hmm.
don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but that is true. That is true. Maybe we just
Yeah.
want a chance to get it right or to keep adding to the story.
Yes. Oh, keep adding to the story.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for adding to this story and being on my podcast.
Of
And I would
course.
love to have you on again sometime.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm going to link Imani's channel down below. Thank you again so much for being here.
Awesome. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Sam.